Hey everybody, Proverbs Guy here. Thank you for joining in with another episode of Let's Talk Shalom with me and your favoriteest co-host, your dream guy. Your dream guy, how are you today?
Good. I'm excited for our guest because I have some education and training and passions in the similar area she works in.
I'm excited to introduce our guest. I'm hoping that she will be able to help a lot of our viewers heal in different areas and that they will definitely check out the website that will be scrolling across the bottom of the screen the entirety of the episode. Stephanie, I have just had the pleasure of meeting you recently, and you are a licensed trauma counselor. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, that's your specialty, but those aren't the only areas that you can counsel in.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. What are some examples of other areas, other types of people that you can help? And specifically, what kind of trauma counseling do you typically deal with?
Yeah. So I primarily work with women who are facing life's challenges. Some of those things include infertility, postpartum depression. I work with a lot of grief. I also work with individuals who have been through childhood and adult trauma. That looks like physical, sexual, emotional, relational, and even spiritual trauma. And then I also really hone in and focus on couples work. While I mentioned before, I do work primarily with women, but I also see men as well who have been through different types of trauma and need healing. And so in the couples work that I do, my focus is on helping relationships heal and find meaningful bonds. I find that many times the couples that I work with, they chose to love who they love, and then they find themselves in a relationship that they're really struggling and they just need extra support. And so I also come alongside of couples and help them heal. And then we also have those situations where, there's a divorce and we need healing after a breakup. And so I work with divorce as well.
As a trauma professional, would you say that it is an equal amount male-female ratio of people who come out of traumatic relationships with enough trauma to seek counseling? Would it be equal, or does it affect some women more?
I think that there's more awareness with women around the need for support. I think that sometimes, unfortunately, with the guys that I've seen, there's a stigma that guys have to be tough. And that's just not true. And so I find that women will reach out more, but men really need to.
What's ironic and dangerous about what you just said, it's so true. Men won't reach out oftentimes and seek help because we want to be strong, but in fact, it's the female counterpart who is showing more strength by seeking out counseling.
Yes.
So how do you suggest that we could break that stigma in the man community so that we are comfortable going to get help from a professional such as yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we see counseling as weak. And in reality, I think one of the things that men bring to the table is wisdom. And in reality, seeking counseling is a wise thing to do because you're able to show up um, stronger after you've had support.
Mm.
It's like getting training for the battle,
Mm.
or like in the military. It's like I tore my ACL or something, but it's all right. I'm a strong warrior. And it's like, well, you can't really fight this with this till that's fixed or till that's healed. You can some, but to fully be engaged, you need to get the doctor to look at that. In a combat medical sense, but in the relational spiritual ministry sense, there's a parallel to that. Like, you want to fight for your family, you want to be on the team, you want to fight for the kingdom. Sometimes it's necessary to stop and reboot before you go out there, because fighting wounded is not as effective as fighting recovered.
Yeah. Yeah, and for some reason, I think men look at going to counseling as the same as going to a hospital with a broken arm, and it's more like going to a gym to work out your muscles. It's to get stronger. It's to get healthier. So if we could just break through to that mentality, a lot more men would be better off.
And there's a lot of barriers, like stigma. Like when I was in the Air Force, if you went to counseling, you can't go to firearms training, you can't get deployed, you can't go to certain training schools you need to go to promote your career. Or also, going through a divorce, that is always going to be brought up against you, especially if you're male. Is oh my gosh, Your Honor, he's crazy. He had depression 10 years ago. He shouldn't have children. I mean, this happens to men a lot. It's very much a concern that it's going to bar you from getting custody, or bar you from seeing your kids, or be a big giant thing. And there's so much stigma. The police department goes to similar things with their careers, and men with custody, and men in ministry too. Like if it's gradually changing, I think, and Stephanie can speak to this a lot more than I could, but if you're in ministry, there's always a stigma. You just don't love Jesus enough. If you have depression and you're in ministry, you should just not be in ministry until you're one of these happy, smiley people. So maybe, Stephanie, could you speak to maybe on the career side of counseling, like how that can affect someone's career or not affect the career, and in custody battles, and then the ministry side?
Yeah.
What you've seen, or what protections people might have if they want to get help, but they're afraid to.
Yeah. I think that you're right. That often, because there has been such a stigma around it, I do believe that there's more awareness now around how healthy it is to get the support. With all the cases that I've worked, one of the things that I have seen is that it actually speaks to your strength as a man if you have been diagnosed with depression, but you actually sought support for that. And so it's not just, hey, I've got this thing going on, but I actually went to get help, right? And so I think that is something that is really important, is that it's not just the recognition of I'm hurting and I feel broken, but I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work to get the support that I need.
So it's not in the 50s it was highly stigmatized, but now it's almost promoted, or more promoted than it would have been. If I have a singles group, Psalm 16, Kingdom Seeking Singles, and if I had this group 20 years ago, it would be like, oh, you're in counseling? No, that's a red flag. But now it's a lot of the women are like want the men to get counseling, and if they go on some dates with someone or the courtship with someone, they actually want to know if he's been through any kind of counseling. And they hope that he has, not that it's not a drawback if he did go to counseling. That's something they look for. It's an attribute. It's a positive now. Whereas before it would be a drawback, but now they hope he went, and they encourage that. And our singles pastor, Misty Bray, was bragging on the guy she's in a relationship with, Mr. Mark, about how proud she was of him. He went to counseling, and then I've got a mental health support group, Psalm 16 mental health support community, where I asked Mark to step in and try to encourage the other men to go to counseling, to get help, and share his story some. So it's, I'm glad it's changing.
Yeah.
It was really a whole different community, a whole different world 20 years ago.
Right. I've heard stories from guys who were like in Vietnam, And we hear stories of like what was therapy back then, what was counseling back then. Well, it was a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah, that
And
was the
so
only option.
if you grew up in that era, and if you fought in the war, and if you hear the word counseling, the only neuropath that you have that has been developed is based on what you knew before. And so I think one of the things about our society today is counseling looks so different than it did before.
Yeah.
And so even through my own private practice, I do a lot of virtual work. Even 2 years ago, that wasn't even something that was super available. And now I can meet with guys and, and ladies who they can sit in their car, get support, be honest, talk about what's really going on, close the laptop, and go about their day. They don't even have to come into the office.
And you don't have to ask all your friends, in your town you live in, if they know somebody, or drive across town to be there.
Right.
This whole thing. So you're easily accessible now because of the internet.
Right.
They can find you, and no one has to know. It's more private than a small town. Ask around. And you mentioned doing virtually. I was going to ask you, because I know the council. I was working on my LPC. I have a master's human services, emphasis marriage and family counseling, but I couldn't do the internships and everything to work for free to get the full LPC like you have. But how many states are you licensed in, or can you do like a virtual almost anywhere in the states? Or how is licensing these days? I haven't looked at it in 10 years.
Yeah, that's a good question, Brian. So I am licensed in the state of Tennessee, and so I can see anyone in the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
Okay.
So as long as they live within the state limits.
Right. Now
Okay.
there is a law that's being passed called an interstate compact agreement. So we hope that it'll come out in 2024, which will allow licensed therapists to be able to operate across state lines, kind of like a traveling nurse.
Yeah.
So that is something that is being kind of worked on right now. It's in the works.
I
That
know
would be
for
terrific.
like your situation, because you're obviously a terrific counselor, that would be a good thing, being able to help people in the states around you. Are you convinced that that would always be a good thing? Like, are there states around Tennessee with looser regulations or expectations from counselors? Would that be of any concern to you?
Not that there's nothing that comes to mind right now. I think that you're who you are as a therapist and what you bring. You bring that to the table no matter what state your client is in. And so I think it really speaks to the therapist and their training and the way that they approach the relationship with their client. So regardless of what state that client is in.
So the resting place counseling, like if someone wanted, say if I'm in Chattanooga and I do have depression, anxiety, I have a disability rating from the military for it. And I was a peer support for it and everything. So just wanted to encourage someone else to kind of be more open to share with other people. So if I wanted to book an appointment with you, would I just go to the resting place counseling.com, and would I need a certain kind of insurance or any certain kind of paperwork or to prove I'm in Tennessee, or how would that process look like from, hey, I heard Stephanie Edwards on that podcast. I really need to talk to someone. And I live in, Chattanooga and she's in Knoxville, 2 hours away. So how would that process be for a person to do that?
Sure. Yeah. So the way I have my website set up is across the top of the website, there's a schedule your free consultation. And what I do with clients, rather than just booking them, I hop on the call with them and we talk 15, 20 minutes. And I just talk to them about, hey, what are your challenges? Here's the ways that I feel like I can help you. Here's what that would look like. Here's what I charge. And here are the next steps. And then they can decide how they want to move forward. And so it's really based on a conversation, because my style is very much relational. And so I want to talk to that person and really talk about a path forward. I might not be the best fit for everyone, but I might be the best fit for a lot of people. And so I think it's really important, rather than just calling an office and scheduling an appointment. For me, I like to be able to talk to the person and say, hey, this is what I feel like I can do. This is how I feel like I can help you. And then also with a resting place, one of the cool things is I get to pray with people. So when they call and we talk
Mhm.
about what their issues are, I kind of want to see God move in their life in the first 15, 20 minutes that we're working together.
Mhm.
One of the things that I'm very passionate about is I don't want to keep people in therapy for years and years and years.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I think it's important when we have that initial conversation of this is how we're going to target what you're going through. Now, some people may need therapy for years, and that's
Mhm.
okay. There's no shame in that.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think it's important when I first started my therapeutic journey to be able to know where are we going and how are
Mhm.
we going to get there. And so I try to do that on our first initial call so that people can kind of get an idea of what am I getting? You
Yeah.
know, you say on your website transformation. What
Mhm.
does that look like for
And it's
me?
not that flying blind model because, like, I have a life coaching service, and I'll give people a free consult to see where they're at. But we have a trauma person, a grief person, and a health person, and just I just try to filter out where they need, and they might need the trauma person for one episode, one round, or a week or a month, and then they might need to talk to the grief person later. And you could refer them out to who best fits them. So in your referral networks, like if someone, say it was out of your scope of specialty, or it just wasn't a good fit for whatever reason, do you refer them out to other people you know and trust? Do you have like a network of people you
Absolutely.
can send them to?
Yes, I have a network of people here in Knoxville, but I also have recently joined your network. And
Yes,
so
ma'am.
there will be people on there
Can send them to
that
you.
as I get to know
Yeah.
that I can refer people to. And so I think it's ethically important to do that.
Yeah.
If it's not within my scope, it's
Mhm.
really not going to serve them. And I'm here to serve them. Right. So,
Absolutely. So we've got a health coach, a trauma coach, a grief coach, and but we also have Dr. Sarah, who's Christian counseling, and then you're in the network too. So, and I'm all you guys, like someone needs something less intensive, or they need something more intensive, or you're just completely booked up. You could refer out, or they could refer to you, and most everybody in there is Torah observant. They're all believers, and most of Torah observant, not all of them. We have a relationship coach who's pretty evangelical Christian. She's great too. But the great thing is we have the doctors and licensed counselors and coaches that all have different specialties, and you can send them to someone else in the Torah community and someone
mhm,
else in the Christian community,
yeah.
which is a great. And we're happy to have you join. That's our missing piece too, because we had no one's in LPC.
Mm,
It's like coaching and then doctor, and then there's like, but on the LPC, is people really need that for so many levels. It's insurance too. Like you can't bill insurance for life coaching, for
right.
example. And some things it's just beyond. I'm a coach, and there's certain things I wouldn't address with like, okay, that's beyond my scope of capacity. Let's send them up to Stephanie.
Right.
And actually, that's kind of where I want to go with my next question. I want to dig into and find out all about the resting place. I'm imagining that you're sitting on the beach in Hawaii one day, watching Drew Carey on your cell phone on Price is Right, and it just clicks. You're like, you know what? I bet I have the personality to help people who have been through extreme trauma. I'm going to give that a try. That's
Mm.
how it all came together.
No, Stephen, it's not, but that's a great guess. How it came
Okay.
together for me was I'll back up. When I was 19 years old, I was doing an internship in the country of Australia, and I met a little 8-year-old boy. And when I met him, he had been through so much trauma, and he had been through home after home after home. And that was my first experience seeing that and touching that and holding that. As he sat in my lap, my heart began to break. And I remember in that moment, that was the seed that was planted in my life. You have to do something. You have to do something, not on my watch. And I remember calling my mom from Australia and saying, not on my watch. Something has to be done. And so, fast forward for the next 15 years, going through training, going back later in life and getting my master's degree, and then the 3,000 clinical hours to become licensed, all of that work, all of that training to now being able to have my own private practice and to be able to work with individuals and families and couples. And so the 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 journey has really it's really been a journey for me, but it goes back to that original seed. That's my why. Because when I saw him and the trauma that he went through, I began to think about the parents. I began to think about the families, and I began to think about the generational trauma. What was it like for his mom? What was it like for his dad? And how can I really show up and make an impact? How can I really show up and make a difference? How can I really show up in such a way that people know that they can move from hopelessness to hope, that there can be life transformation? And so it started for me back when I was 19 years old. Fast forward to last fall, God began to work in my life about having a space where people could feel seen and heard and known. Because here, let's be real, in the last 2 years, when we went through the whole pandemic, we were seen less, we were heard less, and we were known less. And so when one of the things that we need most, even as a child, is I see you, I hear you, I delight in you, I know you. And if that doesn't happen to you as a child, then you're going to carry that onto your adult life where you don't feel seen, you don't feel safe, you don't feel known by people. And so to create a space where people could come in and they could feel brave in sharing their story, which is a sacred space. And in the sharing, they can begin to unpack those places where they've been wounded and where they've been traumatized. And so back last fall, I began to really pray into this and reading in scripture, and was reading the verse, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the spirit of counsel and wisdom and might. And it was just through just ruminating over that, I began to think about what would a space look like that felt like rest? Could someone come into a space with me and feel like for that hour that we had together, that their soul was able to rest? And so thus, the resting place was birthed.
That's way more beautiful than my guess. Is that the background that you use for online therapy sessions?
This is my office, yes.
It is very calming, I have to admit.
Thank you.
Do you deal with secular people and believers alike? It doesn't matter to you. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be an atheist. You need healing. Come to Stephanie.
Here's the thing. When Jesus said, I'll meet the woman at the well, he didn't say, if you're in these categories. He said, I'll meet the woman at the well. And so when the word says that he heals the brokenhearted and he sets the captive free, that he binds up their wounds, he doesn't say, if you have this label. And so the resting place is for anyone.
It's so amazing how God put that on your heart. And it's even more impressive how you've been able to make that dream a reality in just a short amount of time. You know, COVID wasn't awfully that long ago.
Right.
And you're already set up, your LLC, licensed. How much work did that take? Was that a 24/7 job, just preparing what God put on your heart?
Well, so I've been licensed for 2 years and working in a group practice outside of my own practice. And so I've been doing this work for quite a while. It was back in September of last year that God began to birth in me to create this space. And so, yes, it has been a lot of work. It has been a journey. But isn't it worth it when we're able to really sit with an individual and see God doing a work in their life?
I imagine working with traumatic people with traumatic pasts, I should say. It comes at different levels of trauma that they have to heal from. Have you ever come across somebody that was just so broken it was out of, your expertise, someone you just didn't feel like you could help because they were that hurt?
That's a great question. There have been stories. We hear about transference and countertransference in counseling. And what that is, am I healed enough in my own story to really be able to engage with this person in their story? And so there are places that God has healed in me, and there are places that He's continuing to heal in me. And so there are times when I ethically will say, this is stirring up something in me, and I need to refer this person. It's not because their wound or their trauma is too much. It's because I might not be the best fit for them in this season. And so I think that's really important for the listeners to hear. There's no wound and no trauma that is too big. Are you ready to go there? Are you ready to allow yourself to experience healing in that area? I think that is one of the questions that I always ask.
The part of your job that I would hate to do is making the judgment call of when someone has had enough counseling, right? Like, how do you do that? I mean, I realize it's individual basis, but how can you look at someone and have them repeat their traumas to you and then be able to decide whether or not they've healed enough from it? Is it when they can tell the story without crying uncontrollably? Like, that has to be the hardest part of your job, I would think.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way in which the work that I do is very collaborative with my clients, and we talk about what does it look like when you are healed enough to be able to function day to day in what you deem would be normal. And when we think about trauma, anything that happened beyond or in the past is a memory. Okay? It's a memory, but how does that traumatic memory impact you in the present? And so, one of the ways that I gauge this with my clients is in that trauma, you may have begun to develop a belief that I'm unworthy, or that I'm worthless, or that no one wants me, or that we can continue to name those things. Okay. When your interactions with others, socially, relationally, your emotions aren't triggered at a 10 anymore, and you're able to recognize, okay, that belief that I adopted based on the trauma isn't true currently. I'm walking in a different identity. Then that's where there's the integration in healing. That's where we're able to see, okay, so we've been able to move through that, not past it, but we've been able to move through that to be able to say that part of me as a 7-year-old or 8-year-old little girl, she's valuable. And as a 44-year-old woman, I love her, but she can't drive the bus anymore. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. So for people that are my age, Quantum Leap was a show a while back. Sam Beckett jumps in people's bodies throughout time, and he's
I remember that show.
So he's sent to fix their lives, basically, or help them swap the course that they're going to take. And the last episode started getting really spiritual, but the last one, he basically meets God. and he's complaining. He meets his bartender, thinks or fate or something. Someone he's complaining about this whole thing being stuck in this, and he says, "Well, you could choose something else, right? But you said you wanted to change people's lives." And he's like, "Well, it's one life at a time, and I'm not really doing so much." But he's like, "No, you don't understand. This one person's life, when that gets changed, that changes the lives of their children and their neighbors, and everyone around them changes. It's a ripple effect." And kind of the question is like, well, did he choose this or did this choose him?
If Hitler had just had 2 more big hugs.
Yeah, I mean, possibly.
You know what I mean? Like, possibly he would have been filled with love and not hate.
Well, him and Napoleon had and Stalin had very, very, very traumatic childhoods.
Yeah.
But do you feel that this chose you or you chose it? And do you struggle with the effectiveness? Like, am I doing enough? Am I changing enough? Am I not doing enough to affect anything? Or are you kind of satisfied with the work I do every day? This is having a major impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What I will say is that we don't always see things from God's perspective. And so sometimes we desire to. And sometimes we don't necessarily know the impact that healing will truly have on someone. And so I believe in the work that I do, but I believe more in the work that he does through me. And so it is, I'm a vessel and I'm a tool. And it truly is, when we enter into the story of another person, it's a sacred space. And I often tell my clients, if we're going to talk about trauma, let's talk about trauma so that you can get healing there, not just to sit in that. Let's go back. And if it was childhood trauma, let's go back to that little girl or little boy with compassion. Because maybe that little girl or that little boy lost their voice. Maybe they need a voice now. Are you willing to listen to them? And so that's part of engaging our story, is being able to, what is that part of you that was so wounded? What do they want to say? And sometimes, Brian, it's not always a child. Sometimes it's an adult male or female in their 30s that went through a traumatic divorce and lost their voice. And so we go back to those places and we say, where was Yeshua in that? Where was he? And that's what brings healing. And then being able to approach those places from a place of love and kindness and compassion rather than self-contempt.
That's the hard part. It's the really hard part. And we're both INFJs, and we're the type that said to we wake up every day saying, how can I change the world today? But the struggle always is, I changed it enough, or could I change it more? Being satisfied in what we did was enough. And it's effective. Like Desmond Doss, the World War II soldier he's a pacifist, so he became a medic, and he saved like 80 men in this battle in Japan, like risking his own life. And everyone's totally amazed at the people he saved by picking them up, carrying them across the battlefield without a gun. And then, but he's always like, I want one more. I got to get one more. And he constantly go back to this battlefield from the safe place back to the battlefield to drag one more person out. I just want one more. And sometimes it's hard to. We're always caught in that place between, okay, I helped someone today, versus I could have done more, help more people. I know HIPAA and privacy and whatnot. Is there any kind of stories you can relate where you saw like a definite difference, not just in this one person's lives, but you saw the ripple? You saw the ripple effect in their family or their circle, or they went on to help someone else, or it changed something for their children?
Well, certainly in the couples work that I do, I see that on a regular basis with couples that are headed toward divorce. When we meet and we begin to talk about what the issues are. Because, see, Brian, it's not the absence of conflict, it's how quickly can we get it repaired. It's like a flat tire.
Yeah, conflict's
You drive,
inevitable.
you drive a car over a bed of nails, and the tires are going to go flat. How quickly can you get that car back up on the road? And so I see it often in the couples work that I do, but I also see it just in the individual work that I do. I think the areas that I see change the most is in identity. When we have taken on an identity for years and years and years that we're not enough, and whatever label that we've worn, whatever lie that we've agreed with, when someone begins to walk in their identity of this is how Christ sees me, that's where change really do fall off.
That is beautiful.
Well, it needs to go in a book.
It does. So let me ask you this: if we compared signs of trauma needing counseling to symptoms, what symptoms would I need to look for to identify that I need counseling? I imagine one big sign would be if I don't have any close relationships around me because I'm trying to use all my relatives and friends as counselor. Besides that, how can I tell if I need counseling?
So I think one of the big ways is how does what I've been through impact my day to day? I'll give you an example. If I was a 14-year-old girl that walked into my lunch cafeteria and I had no one to sit with, okay, and that was traumatic, okay, and then fast forward 20 years, I walk into a conference and I'm all alone and I go into flight mode. I've got to get out of here. What's showing up in that moment is not 44-year-old self. What's showing up emotionally is 14-year-old trauma, stuck in that I don't belong place. Okay. And so when we start to think about trauma and unpack trauma, there's a lot of talk out there about trauma, trauma, trauma. What I try to really funnel down, nail down is how does what you've been through impact how you're responding socially, relationally, spiritually, emotionally. And if you're finding that you're not walking in the life that you really want to have, you know that you're hurting and that you feel hopeless in this present moment today, then let's unpack some of that and see where that started for you and find healing in those places. Was that an answer to your question?
It was a very good answer to my question, and it did bring up another question, and then I'll hand the reins back over to your dream guy. But I would like to address, narcissism. Do you think narcissists can heal from that condition? I have a
Oh, that's a good
suspicion
question.
as a non-professional that a lot of narcissistic behaviors are rooted in past traumas as themselves. You've heard the expression hurt people hurt people. What's your take on that? You're the professional.
Yeah. So I believe that anything can be healed, right? I also believe that however we want to label it, and so for someone out there who maybe has been diagnosed as narcissistic, there's hope for you, right? I think that for those who have been identified as narcissistic or who self-identify as narcissistic, there's a thick wall of it's all about me and I have to keep it together. And I would wonder if there's some places that we could be curious about in a safe space with an individual who maybe does struggle with narcissistic tendencies.
Thank you for that answer.
Does it seem like an extreme self-preservation almost?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Brian. And oftentimes, unfortunately, hurt people, as you said, and it is an extreme self-preservation, but it's like a tornado sometimes that damages others in its pathway. But I say that from a non-shaming place. It matters not what label has been put on you. Patterns can change. And so I am of a deep belief in that.
That's awesome. And my dad died when I was 20. I was in the military, and 9/11 happened. My family member tried to kill himself. It's a whole just onslaught of stuff. And I always try to be a good person to that point, and then it just hit this level of self-preservation. I'm like, this is killing me. Trying to be a good person is killing me. It's not getting me anywhere, and nothing but bad things happen to good people. So I just like set out to be just totally about me for about 2 years. It was absolutely self-destructive and others destructive. So I kind of relate to that extreme survival mode. Now, I haven't been that in years. I've really worked hard to intentionally make choices to be a better, more empathetic person. But that level of self-preservation, I can kind of understand it. I don't live in it, but I can understand how someone can get there. And that's a really scary thing to me, to know that given enough pressure and fear, all of us can become narcissistic, almost like a reptilian mind, and it's just only self-preservation all the time. Mm-hmm. So, but it kind of leads to a question on mental health and things like that. How do you differentiate between, okay, this is fear and trauma that has affected this person, versus this is like a deeply ingrained, you're born with it, almost organic genetic condition, versus this is spiritual. Like sometimes people say that the overt narcissist is really an Ahab spirit, is an Absalom spirit, and a covert narcissist is a Jezebel spirit. And we're both believers, and so how do you differentiate between what's spiritual, what's genetic, and what's basically conditioning or environment?
Like, do you need a counselor, a straitjacket, or a priest?
Sometimes all three. I've met quite a few individuals that need the trio.
I personally have gone through times in my life where I probably needed all three.
Same here.
I think that it comes down to the discernment. And I do think that there is I tread very lightly on being very quick to say it's this or this or this, because I also know that we are whole beings, body, mind, spirit, soul. And so while I do believe that there are things that are very spiritual, I also want to make sure that I'm sensitive to the Holy Spirit when I speak to those things. And that, because I think sometimes it could be identified as spiritual when in reality, it might be a medication issue, or it might be hormonal, or it might be something circumstantial going on. One of the ways that I think is important to determine that is, how long has this been going on? And is this going on in multiple settings? If this is going on in your family and at work and in your relationship with your husband or wife and with your kids, and it's been that way for years and years and years, then we might be talking about more it's showing up in your relationship with your partner, then it might be something that is specific to, wow, this relationship dynamic is really off and we're not communicating well. So how can we get some help there? So I'm not dodging your question, but what I'm trying to say is, I try to be very careful in assessing what it is, um, so that we can kind of handle it with care and address it appropriately.
Yeah, you don't want to jump the gun because I think everyone, well, not everyone, but oftentimes people have this need to make themselves feel needed. Like if you're a deliverance minister, everyone has a demon. If you're a psychiatrist, everyone's got a disorder. If you're a chiropractor, everyone needs an alignment. So it takes a lot of discipline to say, maybe it's not this thing that I can help with. Maybe it's something someone else will have to help with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always just this one thing or that thing. And it often is all three. I always compare it to like a combination. I used to get people out of the moccasin bed in the mental hospital here. For 3 years, my job was to help get people out of the mental hospital. And it was always, it feels like a combination log. It's like there's the chemistry and there's the environment and there's the spiritual. And it doesn't matter. Those are three doors, and it doesn't matter which combination which door gets unlocked first. One will unlock the door for the other two. People might be in different stages where they have one of the three or two of the three going on at once, but over time they end up with all three because the conditions might trigger the genetics and open the spiritual, or the spiritual might create the conditions to trigger the genetic, or the genetic might let the conditions in and then cause the spiritual. But they always end up together eventually. All three will pile on someone at once over time. But you don't know where it started, but eventually they all three are at the same party almost.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think too, when we look at mental health, we have to consider that mental health is socially what's going on with you, emotionally, but also psychologically. And an individual can have great mental health 6 months ago, but their mental health is in the tank right now. And it could be that they just lost their job, or they're in a relationship that they're struggling right now, or maybe they had a death in their family, or maybe they're taking care of aging parents. Whatever that looks like, mental health is fluid.
Yes.
And so I think that's important to consider as well, is sometimes we just say, well, you went to therapy 2 years ago. Well, I'm in a totally different situation now. Or sometimes the best therapy is a good, connected community. And so if you're not in a connected community, your mental health might not be the best.
Do you think a lot of what we're seeing today is the side effects of disconnection? Like, we have only children, or people in one-parent households, even two-parent households, whereas 100 years ago, you had your mom, your dad, and your grandpa, and your grandma, and your 15 cousins all on the same street. And we're so isolated, especially like with COVID. Do you think that's been like a breeding ground for mental health, just the isolated, fast-paced society we have?
Absolutely. We were born for connection. If you go all the way back to the garden, they were connected. Back to the Garden of Eden, there was peace, and they were connected. And we live in a world right now that promises to be very connected through social media, through all kinds of avenues. But when's the last time that we really sat down with someone and were present, and we're listening, and we're engaged? And so I do think, Brian, that the deepest cries of our heart is to be connected with our God, but also with others. And when that's missing in our life, it definitely affects our mental health.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Psalm 68:6 says, Psalm 68 it's one of the Psalms, of course, but it's an initiative where the part of Psalm 68 ministry I have is to connect people by geography, by situation. The Psalm 68 initiative is to just connect people any way we can, because it's so damaging, the isolation. But Psalm 68:6 says, rewind. He places the lonely in homes, but the rebellious live the sun-scorched land. And I think some isolation is involuntary, but a lot of times we're just refused to connect with anybody unless they're exactly like us in every way. we're just so prideful we refuse that, and then we kind of experience the consequences of isolation. But God's desire is to place the lonely in homes. So it says in Psalm 68:6, He places the lonely in homes. And that's not just, I think it's God's desire. It's God's desire is something we should try to carry out on the earth as well. Like if God wants the lonely to be in homes, then we should participate in that, like co-labor with God to bring that about. Like, if we see someone lonely, to try to connect them any way we can, not just with us, but with other people.
Right.
And I would like to pay you a compliment. You remind me so much of home. You just feel like family. I feel like I could just walk through your front door without knocking and grab a glass of tea from your fridge and help myself to cookies on the counter. Like, you're very much welcoming and friendly. So I wanted to compliment you on that. And also, if people wanted to get a hold of you, do they only have access to you going through the restingplacecounseling.com? Do you also have Facebook
or LinkedIn?
groups? How all can they get a hold of you?
Sure. Yes, I have Instagram, The Resting Place Counseling. I also have Facebook, Resting Place Counseling as well. And then I have my business phone number is 865-369-9535.
Excellent.
And I have a question.
No, go ahead, Brian.
So I have about at the hour mark. So I have a final question: Is if someone wanted to be an LPC, like a licensed professional counselor, like you are, what schooling did you have to go through? How long does it take? The practical side of, oh wow, that sounds like my calling too.
Yeah.
How would they get there?
Right. So the path to an LPC is you have to have your master's degree. And then after you finish your master's degree, you do an internship and a practicum. And then you work and do 3,000 clinical supervised hours. And once those hours are completed, you can take the national exam. And once you pass the national exam, then you're actually licensed to practice.
Oh, awesome. So and it's about 3 years, 4 years. What would you say it would take on average to complete that from I have a bachelor's in something to
master's, that would be 5 or 6 years there. Well, unless you did expedited, I suppose.
Depends on the master's. Like I have a 30-hour master's, but like some programs are 60 or 90 hours.
Yeah. So my experience was I went to Liberty University. They had a 48-hour non-licensure master's program and then a 60-hour licensure program. And so it's all about what you want. I will say this, that there's a lot of individuals making a lot of impact in people's life that aren't licensed. And so being a licensed therapist is not the only route. But if you're going to go the route being licensed, you want to make sure that the school that you attend is make sure you check the tracks to make sure it's a licensure track. And then you want to get connected after you graduate with an organization that will allow you to work your hours.
How many counselors currently work for you?
None yet. I'm a private practice, and I'm the sole owner and therapist.
But as soon as this video goes out on YouTube, that's going to change. You're going to be getting so many phone calls. You're going to definitely want to start taking on some partners. Something to consider. Near the hour mark of every episode, we usually take on a couple people from the audience if they have questions or comments, like they absolutely love you or how do they get where you're at. We have one in the back waiting for us now. Is it okay with you if we bring him on and allow him to ask you a question or make a comment?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Hey, Brother Ryan, how you doing tonight?
Hey,
Ryan.
I'm doing great. I am blessed. Stephanie, so good to see you. I wasn't here at the very beginning. How did you and Stephen meet each other? How do you know each other, if you don't mind my asking?
So Brian
Brian.
So Brian introduced me to Stephen, and a mutual friend of mine was actually on the podcast a few weeks back. And so just really linked us up and connected us.
Yeah, Bonnie and Jeff at Man the Gate Publishing. For all you counselors that are writing books and people like Ryan that need to write a book, that's the people to
You
call.
know,
I
might end
remember
up-
them. They were so wonderful.
I
He
might
was a
end up
cop.
writing a book. I don't know. At the very least, Stephen and another friend of mine simultaneously came up with the idea. I don't know, maybe about 2 months ago now, month and a half, that I would start coming on YouTube and giving my testimony and then hosting shows, talking to people. If you don't know my background, I was delivered over a period of months as God began sanctifying me. I was delivered from the deception of homosexuality. I had lived that life for a good number of years. And I believe I was saved, but I was definitely backslidden. And in 2019, God allowed something to happen to me that greatly hurt me and traumatized me. But that event caused me to turn to God and ask Him to help because I couldn't deal with it on my own. I was liable to do something stupid and foolish if I tried to deal with it on my own. I was hurt by someone that I really cared about. And it was someone who I only recently learned I had made into an idol. And because I did that, this person had to turn against me. God had to cause that to happen because I had broken the first commandment and I didn't even know it. But I'll tell you, for
Is
years,
your question, Ryan, whether you should be willing to drive to Tennessee to get counseling with Stephanie? Because the answer is definitely yes.
Well, I'm getting to that, Stephen.
Okay.
I'm getting to that. It's just so funny. What a coincidence. Are there such things as coincidences, or does God do all of this? I've been having too many coincidences, and I know it's really God. Okay, for years, I had thought that I wanted a boyfriend, but God has shown me that that's not really what I want. What I thought I wanted isn't what God wants for me. What I really wanted was a family. Because I never married and had kids, I just had this longing for family. And God has been bringing families into my life. Christian families, godly families. Now, when I heard that you were in Knoxville, my ears perked up. I said, Knoxville? Guess where I just came from yesterday from an overnight trip to Knoxville. Two families that God has brought into my life live there, and I went to visit them this past weekend. One of them is a wonderful, godly Christian singing group that lives there. And another one is a young couple who have a newborn baby that I met at Dinosaur Adventureland. And I was able to spend time with both of them. And in fact, I'm trying to orchestrate both of them becoming friends with each other because they're all Gen Zers and they all love the Lord. And the singing group, I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're called the Family Sowell.
I haven't. I haven't.
You have heard of them?
I have not. I have not.
Oh, well, they live in Knoxville, and
Okay.
they are. You look them up online. They are. It's
Is
they're a
your
group of-
question whether or not the family singing group needs counseling? Because I would still say yes.
No. I just am so amazed that she is where. This Knoxville keeps drawing me to it. Are you looking? Yeah, I would like to. Maybe next time I'm up there, which is going to be next month, maybe we could meet or something and talk. And but the family Sowell is 3 brothers and twin sisters, and they are just very godly. And that family has welcomed me into it and made me feel like I'm a part of it. And I feel far more peaceful and joyful and fulfilled now that including this family here, now that I've got so many godly people in my life versus just people that like the same body parts or whatever,
So you have an ever expanding circle, like you have a licensed
I do.
counselor in your circle now. You've got a life
Yes.
coach. You've got a media superstar. You've always musicians, you got this expanding circle of friends, but I think sometimes
yeah,
counseling might be a bit helpful to help you be a better friend, or even you learn skills to help with you. Like you might go to counseling, and you learn skills to help you, and you can use those to help other people.
yes. And I guess I did think of a question. Do you sometimes counsel people who are struggling with same-sex attraction, or that they're in that lifestyle? Do you counsel people like
Absolutely.
that?
That's
Yeah.
a great question.
And
Yeah.
I have actually worked with couples who were married, same sex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know some myself,
So
and
that is a
I'm
great
not going to tell them. I'm not going to tell them what to do. I'm not going to preach to people, but I just know that God told me that, look, my word says you shouldn't live this way. And it doesn't matter how you feel, because it felt right to me, to my flesh. But I've learned that if the Bible contradicts your flesh, then your flesh is wrong, not the Bible.
Mhm.
And I used to go to a gay affirming church where they took those verses and tried to tried to make them conform to the homosexual, affirming homosexuality or not condemning it. But I no longer subscribe to that. And there's a couple of several ex-gay people that are on YouTube that are out there ministering to people. You may have heard of Beckett Cook.
Mhm.
He's one of the leading. He's got a YouTube channel where
No.
he's former
Quickly,
homosexual.
Ryan, if Ryan did actually want to come see you, or anybody who lives outside of Tennessee, can you help them as long as they come to Tennessee?
So within my license, I'm allowed to see anyone that is a resident of Tennessee.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it covers Tennessee residents of Tennessee. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I
That's a
know.
good question.
Yeah.
I
Could
will
you
definitely.
refer him out to if he's like, say, are you in Florida right now or
Me?
Georgia?
I'm sorry.
Which state do you reside in legally?
I live near Atlanta. I'm about 3 hours. I've lived near Atlanta, Powder Springs. I'm about 3 hours from Knoxville.
Okay. So Stephanie
And
could, if she referred you as someone in Georgia, she works with the
Absolutely.
network.
yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
But I do know two very good godly families, and I'll ask if they need counseling of any sort, I'll refer them to you.
That'd be great.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you for that, bud.
Yeah, she's just now opening. So anybody, send them,
Oh, yeah.
get some business going. And, we need more people of faith in the mental health field because it's wild out there.
Yeah, that's great. Like I said, this is not an accident. I just came from Knoxville, and you're in Knoxville, Stephanie. And
There's your
I
confirmation.
know,
Yeah, make sure
Maybe
you
Ryan-
grab her email and share it on your social media for us, or
Yeah,
the name of
website.
her business.
I already shared a link to her website to Laria Buckingham. I've already done that. So
Awesome. And maybe you'll be a Tennessee resident. That's your confirmation.
That might be your confirmation. You may want to get up to Tennessee, friend.
maybe I should move there.
Yeah,
And maybe you
that
should
makes-
stop by Chattanooga next time and let the people in Chattanooga know you're Chattanooga.
I do have a job here in Georgia, but no, I like living here.
yeah, but
because
you
I have
work for the
pretty-
federal government, Ryan. That gig's not going to last forever.
You're
So
probably
the
right.
yeah, we got post offices here too.
Yep.
So,
Can I just pause
Yeah,
and
you
say
do. I
something?
saw a
go
couple.
ahead, Steph.
I just want to say to you, Ryan, thank you for sharing the details of your story, because
You're welcome.
it is
Oh,
a
you're
sacred
welcome.
space when we allow someone. I often say our story, not everyone has permission to hear our story. And the fact that you came on tonight
Yeah.
and you shared what God had done in your life, I think shows so much courage. And so I just want to speak to you and say, I'm honored that you shared that. And yeah, so I just wanted to pause and make sure that was spoken.
Well, thank you. I've found, Stephanie, that the more I do share my story with people, the easier it gets, because I've not been met with judgment.
Mm.
I've not been met with self-righteousness. I've been met with acceptance. I've been met with, me too. You're not
Mm.
alone. or maybe not the same sin, but boy, I sure had a lot of sin in my life too.
Mm.
And God can clean anyone's heart and anyone's mind. God can. There's another man named Christopher Yuan, who is the son of Chinese immigrants. He used to live that life. In fact, he lived in Atlanta for a while, and so I really identify with him because in his book, he mentioned places in Atlanta like gay bars and gay-oriented restaurants and places I used to go to. And so it was like really hit home to me. So I recommend if anyone's struggling with this issue, read Christopher Yuan or find him on YouTube, Beckett Cook, Rosario.
We also have an interview with Ryan. We interviewed Ryan a few weeks back too. So
that's
like
true.
Ryan's interview.
You guys did interview me, and I'm very.
And Ryan
grateful.
is also, he's bashful. He hasn't bragged about it one time, but he is the host of his own YouTube show on my channel called And Such Were Some of You. And he's doing great work over there.
Thank you, Stephen, and I hope you got my message. I won't be able to host this Wednesday night.
Oh, that's fine. I'm going to have Brian do it.
Yeah, let Brian do it because there's a CMI speaker going to be at a church that I just can't miss it because I love that ministry just as much as I love Kent Hovind's ministry, and I support them.
And that's someone else we interviewed is Ken Hovind, the creation scientist. Awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, creation science people.
Did anyone else have any questions or dreams or anything like that before we wrap our hour up?
Going once, going
If anybody
twice.
else wants to come in.
Sold. Stephanie, it's yours.
Awake want to come in?
I've put the offer out there. Anybody who wanted to ask questions had the opportunity, and I put the link. You were the only one who took the bait.
It'd be nice to have her come in here.
I would love for 1 million people to come sign up, especially anyone from Tennessee. Anyone from Tennessee could come on.
We can post this and have a Chattanooga group and a Tennessee group, and so we can post the video and the interview
for our as well locals. As the Buckinghams.
So we can post for the locals in the Tennessee Torah Fellowship Facebook group, Chattanooga Torah Keepers Facebook group, and then Psalm 16 Mental Health Support Community.
Awesome.
All right.
The word out.
Well, Stephanie, I really appreciate you coming, and you've been a blessing. I absolutely love you.
Oh, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Steph. You're awesome. And I really appreciate the work you do because I've been asked for years by people, hey, do you know a Torah observing counselor? I wish I did. For years and years and years. And I know, like last year, I had a TV show, Dr. Sarah was on my TV show, and she's close to Johnson City, I think. And then we met you. So I've only met 2 licensed professionals in about 10, 15 years of being Torah keeper. So it's very, and I've met very few Christians there in the counseling field. So it's or evangelicals. So it's a blessing you even exist and doing what you're doing. What's up, Brian?
Check this group out, Stephanie, if you would. They do live in your neck of the woods.
Okay.
They are wonderful. I mean, and I'm not just saying that. They have made me part of their family.
Awesome.
All right. God bless you. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in. And make sure you're back next week for Let's Talk Shalom.
Let's talk Shalom.